The morning mist clung to the Norfolk countryside like a gentle embrace as Catherine, Princess of Wales, stood at the window of Adelaide Cottage, watching the early December light filter through the bare branches of the oak trees. Her fingers traced the condensation on the glass, creating small patterns that reminded her of the frost flowers she used to draw as a child. Today felt different somehow, charged with an emotional weight that made her heart both heavy and hopeful. In the distance, she could see William emerging from the stables, his breath creating small clouds in the crisp air as he spoke quietly to one of the grooms. Even from this distance, she could read the tension in his shoulders, the way he carried himself when something significant was weighing on his mind. They had received the invitation from King Charles 3 days ago, handwritten in his familiar script on the cream-colored stationery that bore the royal cipher. The words had been simple, but the emotion behind them had been unmistakable. My dear William and Catherine, the letter had begun. As we approach this Christmas season, I find myself reflecting on the precious nature of family and the importance of being together during times that matter most. I would be deeply honored if you and the children would join me at Sandringham for Christmas this year. There are conversations I wish to have, memories I hope to create, and perhaps some healing that needs to take place. Your loving father, Charles. Catherine had watched William read the letter twice, his blue eyes scanning each word as if searching for hidden meanings or unspoken concerns. She knew her husband well enough to recognize the complex emotions playing across his features. There had been moments of strain between father and son in recent months, not from any lack of love, but from the weight of duty, the pressure of public life, and the natural tension that comes when one generation prepares to fully embrace responsibilities while another begins to step back. The sound of small feet thundering down the hallway broke Catherine's contemplation. Prince George appeared in the doorway, his dark hair tousled from sleep, followed closely by Princess Charlotte, who was already dressed and had clearly been up for some time, and little Prince Louis, who was dragging his favorite stuffed animal behind him. "Mummy," Charlotte said, her voice carrying that particular mixture of excitement and uncertainty that Catherine had come to recognize, "Papa says we're going to see Grandpapa at the big house for Christmas. Will there be lots of people there?" Catherine knelt down to Charlotte's level, smoothing her daughter's hair with gentle fingers. "Yes, darling. We'll be staying at Sandringham with Grandpapa Charles. It's a very special place where your papa spent many Christmases when he was your age." George, now fully awake and curious, perched on the edge of a nearby chair. "Will it be different from our Christmas here? I like our traditions." The innocent question struck Catherine deeply. She and William had worked so hard to create their own family traditions, their own ways of celebrating that felt authentic and grounded despite the extraordinary circumstances of their lives. The thought of stepping back into the formal structure of a royal Christmas at Sandringham brought with it a mixture of nostalgia and anxiety. "Sometimes," Catherine said carefully, choosing her words with the precision she had learned was necessary when speaking to children who would one day face public scrutiny, "we have chances to honor both our own special ways of doing things and the traditions that came before us. This Christmas will be about bringing those together." William appeared in the doorway, having returned from his morning routine. His presence immediately shifted the energy in the room, and Catherine could see him assessing the mood, reading the subtle cues that told him how his family was processing this significant change to their holiday plans. "I've just spoken with Papa," William said, settling into a chair and opening his arms as Louis immediately climbed into his lap. "He's asked Mrs. Anderson to prepare the rooms in the east wing, the ones that overlook the gardens. He remembers that Charlotte loves to watch for the deer in the morning." Catherine felt her heart tighten at this detail. Charles had been paying attention, storing away small pieces of information about his grandchildren, caring enough to remember Charlotte's fascination with the wildlife that roamed the Sandringham grounds during their previous visits. "The thing is," William continued, his voice taking on the gentle but serious tone he used when he needed to prepare his children for something important, "Grandpapa has been thinking a lot about family lately. About making sure we all understand how much we mean to each other." George, ever the perceptive older brother, tilted his head thoughtfully. "Is Grandpapa sad about something?" The directness of the question hung in the air for a moment. Catherine exchanged a look with William, both of them navigating the delicate balance between honesty and age-appropriate information. "You know how sometimes when people get older, they think more about the people they love and want to make sure they spend time together?" William asked. "That's what Grandpapa is feeling.
He wants to make sure we have wonderful memories together.
Charlotte, who had been listening intently, suddenly brightened.
Can we make him a special present? Something just from us?
That's a beautiful idea, Catherine said, feeling a wave of love for her daughter's generous heart.
What did you have in mind? Maybe we could write him a book? About all the things we love about being his grandchildren? Louis, not to be outdone, piped up from William's lap. I can draw pictures.
And I can write the stories, George added, his natural leadership qualities already emerging. Catherine felt tears prick at her eyes as she watched her children, so naturally and instinctively understanding the importance of connection and love. They had no idea of the complex dynamics at play, the weight of history and duty that sometimes made simple family relationships more complicated. To them, this was simply an opportunity to show their grandfather how much he meant to them. Later that afternoon, while the children worked on their special project in the drawing room, Catherine found herself walking through the gardens of Adelaide Cottage with William. The winter air was sharp and clean, and their footsteps crunched softly on the frost-covered grass. I keep thinking about that last conversation I had with Papa, William said, his hands pushed deep into his coat pockets. When he talked about legacy and making sure the important things don't get lost in all the noise of public life. Catherine slipped her arm through his, feeling the familiar comfort of their physical connection.
He's been carrying so much, hasn't he? The weight of the crown, the constant scrutiny, the responsibility for the entire institution. And, through it all, he's been trying to be a good father and grandfather. Sometimes I wonder if I truly understand what he's given up for duty, William admitted. When I watch him with the children, I see glimpses of the father he might have been if circumstances had been different. If he hadn't been carrying the burden of knowing he would one day be king. They walked in comfortable silence for a while, both lost in their own thoughts. Catherine found herself thinking about her own journey into royal life, how different her path had been from Charles's. She had chosen this life, had time to prepare and adjust, had been able to maintain connections to her own family and background. Charles had been born into it, shaped by it from his earliest memories. I think, Catherine said finally, this Christmas is his way of trying to bridge those gaps. Between duty and family, between the public role and the private person. Between the grandfather he wants to be and the king he has to be. William stopped walking and turned to face her. Are you nervous about it? About spending Christmas at Sandringham again? Catherine considered the question honestly. The truth was complicated. Sandringham held so many memories, some beautiful and some tinged with the complexity of royal life. It was where she had spent her first Christmas as William's wife, where she had learned the intricate protocols and traditions that came with being part of the royal family. It was also where she had sometimes felt the weight of history pressing down, the sense of being a small part in a much larger, ongoing story. I'm nervous about getting it right, she admitted. About making sure the children feel comfortable and happy while also honoring what this means to your father. About balancing our family's needs with his hopes for what this Christmas can be. William reached out and took her hands in his touch warm despite the cold air. Do you know what I love most about you? How you always think about everyone's heart, everyone's feelings. Papa asked for this Christmas because he trusts us. He trusts that we'll bring our authentic selves, not perform some version of what we think he wants. The children are so excited about their book project, Catherine said, a smile breaking across her face. Charlotte has already planned illustrations for every page, and George is taking it so seriously, making sure every story is perfectly written. And Louis keeps adding more and more drawings, William laughed. I think he's single-handedly creating an entire art gallery for his grandfather. As they turned back toward the house, Catherine felt something shift inside her. The nervousness was still there, but it was being overtaken by anticipation. This Christmas would be different, certainly, but perhaps that was exactly what they all needed. Perhaps Charles's invitation was an opportunity for all of them to discover new depths in their relationships, to create memories that honored both tradition and the unique family they had become. That evening, as Catherine tucked Charlotte into bed, her daughter asked, "Mummy, do you think Grandpapa will like our book?" I think, Catherine said, kissing her daughter's forehead, that it will be one of the most precious gifts he's ever received.
Because it comes from your hearts, and it shows him how much you love him.
Will you be happy at the big house Christmas?
The question caught Catherine off guard with its perceptive simplicity.
I think I will be, darling.
Because we'll all be together, and sometimes the most important thing is just being with the people we love. Later, as Catherine and William sat by the fire in their sitting room, she found herself thinking about the journey that had brought them to this moment. From their university days to their wedding, from becoming parents to taking on increasing royal responsibilities, their life had been a constant process of growth and adaptation. "William," she said softly, "I keep thinking about what this Christmas might mean for your father. How it might be his way of making sure that no matter what happens in the future, we all know how much family means to him." William was quiet for a long moment, staring into the flames.
"I think you're right.
And I think it's also his way of passing something on to us. Not just about duty or responsibility, but about the importance of staying connected to what really matters." As the fire crackled and the house settled into evening quiet around them, Catherine felt a deep sense of gratitude for this moment of peace before the significance of the Christmas ahead. Tomorrow they would begin preparing for their journey to Sandringham, for a Christmas that promised to be filled with emotion, connection, and perhaps healing. In her heart, she knew that this holiday season would become one of those pivotal moments that families remember and treasure, the kind of gathering that strengthens bonds and creates stories that get passed down through generations. And, as she thought about King Charles, waiting at Sandringham with hope and love in his heart, she felt honored to be part of creating that legacy. The drive to Sandringham unfolded like a journey through William's childhood memories. Catherine watched her husband's profile as familiar landmarks came into view, noting the subtle changes in his expression as they passed the village pub where he had once celebrated his 18th birthday, the church where he had attended countless Christmas services, and, finally, the imposing gates that marked the entrance to the estate that had shaped so much of his early life.
"Papa, look!"
Prince Louis called out from his car seat, pointing excitedly at a group of horses grazing in a nearby field.
"Are those the Queen's horses?"
"Those belong to your great-grandfather's estate," William explained, his voice carrying a mixture of nostalgia and emotion. "Some of them have been here for many years, just like the deer and the rabbits you'll see in the gardens."
Catherine felt her heart skip a beat as Sandringham House came into view.
The Georgian mansion stood majestically against the winter sky, its red brick facade warm and welcoming despite the imposing nature of its architecture. She had been here before, of course, but never under circumstances quite like these. Previous visits had been for formal occasions or brief family gatherings. This Christmas invitation felt different, more personal, carrying with it the weight of hopes and intentions that went far beyond holiday tradition. As their car pulled up to the main entrance, Catherine could see King Charles emerging from the house, flanked by several members of staff but somehow managing to convey an air of informal warmth despite the formal setting. He was wearing a familiar tweed jacket, one she had seen him in during countless family photographs, and his face bore an expression of genuine anticipation that made her chest tighten with emotion. The children were out of the car almost before it had come to a complete stop, their excitement overriding any protocol considerations. Prince George, trying to maintain some dignity as the eldest, walked quickly but purposefully toward his grandfather. Princess Charlotte broke into a run, her dark hair flying behind her, while Prince Louis, true to his nature, launched himself forward with complete abandon. Catherine watched as Charles knelt down to receive his grandchildren, his face transforming with pure joy as they surrounded him. The formality of the setting seemed to melt away entirely as he gathered them into his arms, his voice carrying across the courtyard as he exclaimed over how much they had grown and how wonderful it was to see them.
"Grandpapa!"
Charlotte's voice rang out clearly.
"We made you something very special.
But it's a surprise, so you can't see it until Christmas morning."
"A surprise?"
Charles replied, his voice filled with theatrical wonder.
"How absolutely marvelous."
"I shall have to practice being very patient indeed." William appeared at Catherine's side, offering her his arm as they approached the reunion scene. She could feel the tension in his body, the subtle nervousness that came with returning to a place that held so many complex memories. But, as she watched him observe his father with their children, she could also sense something else, a growing appreciation for the man Charles had become, for the grandfather he was choosing to be. "Your Majesty," Catherine said softly as they approached, and Charles immediately stood, still keeping one hand on Charlotte's shoulder. "Please, Catherine," he said, his voice warm with affection, "today we are simply family."
I've been looking forward to this for weeks.
The embrace he offered was genuine and extended, and Catherine found herself surprised by the emotion she felt in his arms. This was not the formal greeting of protocol, but the hug of a father-in-law who genuinely cared for her well-being and was grateful for her presence in his son's life. "Papa," William said, stepping forward, and the two men embraced with a warmth that spoke of recent conversations and growing understanding. "Welcome home, William," Charles said quietly, and Catherine caught the significance of those words.
Not welcome to Sandringham, but welcome home.
As if this Christmas was Charles's way of affirming that no matter how complicated their relationship had sometimes been, this would always be William's home. Mrs. Anderson, the long-serving housekeeper, appeared with several other staff members to help with the luggage and to greet the family. Catherine had always appreciated Mrs. Anderson's quiet efficiency and warm demeanor, the way she managed to make even the most formal occasions feel somehow more personal and comfortable. "Ma'am," Mrs. Anderson said to Catherine with a smile that reached her eyes, "we've prepared tea in the small drawing room, and I've taken the liberty of having some special treats ready for the young ones."
"Thank you, Mrs. Anderson," Catherine replied.
"That sounds perfect." As they made their way into the house, Catherine was struck anew by the grandeur of Sandringham's interiors, but also by the clear efforts that had been made to create a welcoming, family-friendly atmosphere. She noticed fresh flowers in every room they passed, not the formal arrangements typical of state occasions, but simpler, more intimate displays that spoke of personal attention and care. The small drawing room had been arranged with comfortable seating grouped around a crackling fire, and Catherine could see that Charles had clearly given thought to making the space appealing for children. There were books stacked on side tables, a collection of games visible on a nearby shelf, and, most touchingly, a small wooden rocking horse that she recognized from photographs of William's own childhood. "I thought the children might enjoy exploring some of the toys I saved from when their father was small," Charles explained, noting Catherine's gaze.
That rocking horse was William's favorite when he was about Louis's age.
Prince Louis immediately gravitated toward the horse, his eyes wide with wonder, while Charlotte began examining the books with the careful attention she always gave to new reading material. George, meanwhile, was drawn to the large windows that offered a view of the extensive gardens and the deer park beyond. "Grandpapa," George said thoughtfully, "Papa told us that you used to read stories to him when he was little.
Would you read to us sometime this Christmas?"
Catherine felt her breath catch at the simplicity and directness of the request. Charles's face lit up with such genuine pleasure that she had to blink back tears. "My dear boy," Charles said, settling into a chair near George, "I would be absolutely delighted to read to you. In fact, I have some books that I used to read to your father that I've been hoping to share with you children."
"Really?"
Charlotte looked up from her examination of a particularly beautiful illustrated volume.
"The same books Papa heard when he was our age?"
"The very same ones," Charles confirmed.
"Some of them have been in our family for generations.
They're part of your heritage, your connection to all the people who came before you." William moved to stand behind Catherine's chair, his hand coming to rest gently on her shoulder. She could feel him absorbing this scene, watching his father interact with their children in ways that perhaps he wished had been possible during his own childhood. The demands of royal duty had been different then, the expectations more rigid, the opportunities for simple family moments fewer and more precious. Tea was served on fine china, but Catherine noticed that Charles had specifically requested child-friendly portions and treats. There were small sandwiches cut into interesting shapes, scones with jam and cream, and special biscuits that Louis could manage easily with his small hands. Every detail spoke of careful consideration for making this gathering comfortable and enjoyable for everyone. "I've been thinking," Charles said as he poured tea with the practiced ease of someone who genuinely enjoyed the ritual, "about some of the Christmas traditions we might share this year. Some old ones that your father remembers, and perhaps some new ones that you children might like to start."
"What kind of traditions?"
Charlotte asked, her natural curiosity evident. "Well," Charles said, settling back with his teacup, "there's always been a tradition of Christmas Eve gifts, small presents that help build excitement for Christmas morning. And, on Christmas Day itself, we attend church service in the village, which gives us a chance to be part of the wider community." Catherine appreciated how Charles was presenting these traditions not as obligations but as opportunities for connection and meaning.
But, I was also thinking, Charles continued, that this year we might start something new. Perhaps you children could help me write Christmas cards to some of the people who work here on the estate. The gardeners and groundskeepers and everyone who helps make this place special. Could we interview them first? George asked, his mind already working on the logistics. To learn about their families and what they like about working here. Catherine felt a surge of pride at her son's thoughtful suggestion. This was exactly the kind of engagement that she and William tried to encourage in their children, the understanding that their privileged position came with opportunities to connect with and appreciate the people around them. That's a wonderful idea, George, Charles said, and Catherine could hear the genuine approval in his voice. We could make it a proper project. You could learn about everyone's role here and what makes this place work so well. As the afternoon progressed, Catherine found herself relaxing in ways she hadn't expected. The conversation flowed naturally between topics both serious and lighthearted. Charles shared stories about the estate, pointing out various features visible from the windows and explaining their history and significance. The children asked questions with typical curiosity and directness, and Charles answered them with patience and obvious enjoyment. When evening approached and it came time to settle the children for the night, Charles insisted on personally showing them to their rooms in the East Wing. Catherine and William followed as he led the small procession through corridors lined with portraits and artifacts, each with its own story and significance. These are your rooms, Charles announced as they reached a suite of beautifully appointed chambers that overlooked the gardens. Mrs. Anderson has made sure everything is just as you like it. The children's rooms were perfect, comfortable but not overwhelming, with thoughtful touches that showed real consideration for their individual personalities. Charlotte's room had a selection of art supplies and beautiful books, George's had maps and puzzles that would challenge his curious mind, and Louis's had soft toys and games appropriate for his age. Grandpapa, Charlotte said as Charles tucked her into the comfortable bed, thank you for inviting us. This feels like a magical place. Thank you, my darling girl, Charles replied, his voice soft with emotion. Having you here makes it truly magical for me. Later, after the children were settled and sleeping peacefully, Catherine found herself sitting with William and Charles in the main drawing room, the fire crackling comfortably in the background. The formal day had given way to something more intimate, and she could sense that Charles had been waiting for this moment of adult conversation. I want you both to know, Charles began, his voice carrying a weight of sincerity, how much this Christmas means to me. Not just having you here, but having the opportunity to create the kind of family memories I sometimes feel I missed when William was growing up. Catherine felt the significance of this admission, the vulnerability it represented for a man who had spent most of his life maintaining careful public composure. Papa, William said quietly, I've been thinking about that too. About how different things were then, and how much you sacrificed for duty even when it meant missing out on some of the simple moments of fatherhood. The truth is, Charles continued, I learned to be a king before I fully learned to be a father. And, while I don't regret the choices I made, they were necessary for the institution and the country, I do sometimes wonder about the father I might have been under different circumstances. Catherine reached across the space between their chairs and gently placed her hand on Charles's arm. The grandfather you're being now, she said softly, shows us exactly the kind of father you always were in your heart. The love was always there, even when circumstances made it harder to express. The conversation continued late into the evening, touching on memories both difficult and beautiful, hopes for the future, and the complex dynamics of being a family that lived so much of their lives in the public eye. Catherine found herself gaining new appreciation for the challenges Charles had faced throughout his life, and new understanding of the intentionality behind this Christmas invitation. As they finally made their way to their own rooms, Catherine felt a deep sense of gratitude for the openness and vulnerability that Charles had shown. This was more than a family Christmas gathering, it was an opportunity for healing, for deeper connection, and for creating the kind of authentic family bonds that could weather the unique pressures of their public lives. Christmas Eve morning dawned crisp and bright over Sandringham, with frost glittering like diamonds across the expansive lawns and bare branches of the ancient trees that dotted the estate. Catherine woke early, drawn to the windows of their bedroom by the soft light filtering through the curtains. The view was breathtaking, rolling countryside stretching toward the horizon, marked by stone walls and hedgerows that spoke of centuries of careful stewardship. William stirred beside her, and she felt his arms circle her waist as he joined her at the window. "I used to love Christmas Eve mornings here," he said softly, his breath warm against her ear. There was always something magical about the anticipation, the sense that something wonderful was about to happen. "Do you feel that now?" Catherine asked, leaning back against his chest. "More than I have in years," William admitted. "Yesterday felt like coming home in a way I hadn't expected. Watching Papa with the children, seeing how much thought he's put into making this special for all of us." They could hear sounds of activity from the children's rooms, voices raised in excitement, footsteps running back and forth, the unmistakable energy of young people who knew something special was planned for the day. The morning began with a family breakfast in the smaller dining room, another thoughtful choice that made the grand house feel more intimate and personal. Charles appeared wearing casual clothes that made him look more like any grandfather than the King of England, and his pleasure at being surrounded by his family was evident in every gesture and expression. "Grandpapa," Prince Louis announced importantly as he climbed into his chair, "today is the day before Christmas, which means it's almost time for surprises." "Indeed it is," Charles replied with equal seriousness. "And I believe I have a few surprises planned myself. But, first, shall we have a proper breakfast to give us energy for all our Christmas Eve adventures?" Catherine watched as Charles served the children himself, remembering small details about their preferences that touched her heart. He made sure Charlotte had extra jam with her toast, gave George the crispy pieces of bacon he preferred, and cut Louis's fruit into the small pieces he could manage easily. These gestures spoke of attention and care that went far beyond obligation or duty. "I thought we might begin the day with a walk through the estate," Charles suggested as they finished eating. "There are some special places I'd like to show you children, places where your father spent time when he was growing up here." The prospect of exploration immediately captured the children's attention, and soon they were bundled into warm coats and boots for their expedition. Catherine felt a flutter of anticipation as they set out into the crisp morning air, wondering what memories and stories this walk would reveal. Their first stop was the lake that graced the center of the estate, its surface partially frozen and reflecting the winter sky like a mirror. Charles led them to a particular spot along the shoreline, where an old wooden bench sat beneath a massive oak tree. "This," Charles said, settling onto the bench and inviting the children to join him, "was one of your father's favorite thinking spots when he was about your age, George. He would come here when he needed to sort through something important or just wanted some quiet time." William's face showed surprise and emotion as he looked at the familiar bench. "I had no idea you knew about this place, Papa. I thought it was my secret hideaway." "Oh, I knew," Charles said with a gentle smile. "I often watched you from the house windows, making your way down here with a book or just sitting quietly. I respected that you needed that space, but I always kept an eye on you to make sure you were safe." Catherine felt her throat tighten at this revelation. The image of Charles watching over his young son from a distance, giving him independence while still caring for his well-being, spoke to the complex nature of royal parenting and the genuine love that had always been present, even when circumstances made it difficult to express directly. "Can we sit here sometimes too?" Charlotte asked, clearly enchanted by the idea of having her own special place. "This bench belongs to all of us," Charles said. "And I hope that someday, when you're grown up with children of your own, you'll bring them here and tell them about the winter when you first discovered it." They continued their walk, visiting the stables where Charles introduced the children to several gentle horses, including an elderly mare named Duchess who had been a particular favorite of William's during his teenage years. The children were enchanted when Charles produced carrots from his pockets, clearly planned in advance, and showed them how to offer treats safely. "Duchess is getting quite old now," Charles explained as Charlotte gently stroked the horse's soft nose. "But she's still one of the sweetest animals on the estate. Your father learned to ride on her mother, and she taught him patience and gentleness." "Did Papa fall off sometimes?" Louis asked with the direct curiosity typical of a young child. "Everyone falls off when they're learning," Charles replied with a chuckle. "The important thing is getting back on and trying again. Your father was very good at that, very determined and brave." Catherine caught William's eye over the children's heads, and they shared a moment of understanding about the deeper lessons Charles was weaving into these seemingly simple interactions.
He was giving their children not just experiences, but stories about their father, connections to family history, and examples of values he hoped they would embrace. Their next stop was the greenhouse complex, where Charles's passion for gardening was evident in every carefully tended plant and thoughtfully arranged space. The children were fascinated by the tropical plants that provided such a contrast to the winter landscape outside, and Charles proved to be a knowledgeable and enthusiastic guide.
Gardening teaches you to think about the future, Charles explained as he showed them seedlings that wouldn't bloom until spring.
When you plant something, you're making an investment in tomorrow, trusting that with care and patience, something beautiful will grow.
George, ever thoughtful, asked, "Is that like how families work too? Taking care of each other so good things can grow?" Catherine saw Charles pause, clearly moved by the perceptive question. "Exactly like that, George.
Families are gardens where love grows when we tend to them carefully."
The afternoon was devoted to Christmas preparations that felt both traditional and refreshingly personal.
The children helped Charles arrange flowers from the greenhouse into arrangements for the dining room, their small hands working carefully under his patient guidance. They wrote the Christmas cards to estate staff that had been discussed the previous day, with each child adding their own drawings and messages. Catherine found herself working alongside Charles to prepare small gift bags for the estate workers, filled with thoughtful items that reflected genuine appreciation for their service throughout the year. As they worked together in comfortable collaboration, she realized how much she had come to value his perspective and wisdom, how their relationship had evolved from formal courtesy to genuine affection and mutual respect. "Catherine," Charles said quietly as they wrapped the final gifts, "I hope you know how grateful I am for the mother you've become to my grandchildren. Watching them today, seeing their kindness and curiosity and consideration for others that comes from the values you and William have instilled in them." "They have wonderful role models," Catherine replied, her voice warm with sincerity. "Including a grandfather who takes time to show them that position comes with responsibility to care for others." The traditional Christmas Eve service at St. Mary Magdalene Church provided a moment of spiritual reflection and community connection that Catherine found deeply meaningful. The small stone church, with its ancient walls and simple beauty, had hosted royal family Christmas celebrations for generations. But tonight it felt less like a royal obligation and more like a genuine expression of faith and gratitude. The children sat between their parents and grandfather, their behavior impeccable but their attention clearly engaged by the familiar Christmas stories and carols. Catherine noticed how Charles included them in the responses and songs, making sure they felt like participants rather than observers. After the service, there was a brief period of greeting local residents who had attended the Christmas Eve worship. Catherine watched as Charles introduced her children to elderly parishioners who had known William since childhood, creating connections between generations and reinforcing the sense of community that made Sandringham feel like more than just a royal residence. Back at the house, the Christmas Eve evening followed traditions that felt both formal and intimate. There was a special dinner in the main dining room, but the atmosphere was relaxed and filled with laughter as the children shared stories about their day and asked dozens of questions about the house, the estate, and family history. The gift exchange that followed was perhaps the most emotionally significant moment of the day. Charles presented each child with something special, not expensive toys, but meaningful items chosen with clear thought and personal attention. Charlotte received a beautiful leather-bound journal with her initials embossed in gold, along with an elegant fountain pen. George was given a vintage compass that had belonged to his great-grandfather, along with detailed maps of the Sandringham estate. Louis received a small wooden train set that Charles had commissioned to be made specifically for him, each car decorated with symbols representing different aspects of the estate. But it was when the children presented their handmade book to Charles that the evening reached its emotional peak. Catherine watched as her father-in-law opened the carefully wrapped package, his face showing genuine curiosity and anticipation. The book was titled Why We Love Grandpapa Charles, and each page contained a different story or drawing created by the children. Charlotte had written about how he always remembered what they liked and made them feel special. George had composed a story about learning important lessons from his grandfather's wisdom and kindness. Louis had filled several pages with colorful drawings of their family together, including elaborate depictions of Sandringham with all of them standing happily in front of the house. As Charles read through each page, Catherine could see tears gathering in his eyes.
His voice was thick with emotion as he thanked each child individually for their contributions, and, when he reached the final page, a group photo of all of them with a message written in the children's careful handwriting saying, "We love you, Grandpapa, and we're so happy to be your family," he had to pause to compose himself. "This," he said finally, his voice barely above a whisper, "is the most precious gift I have ever received. I will treasure it always." Later, after the children had been settled for the night with stories and songs and countless expressions of excitement about Christmas morning, Catherine found herself once again in evening conversation with William and Charles. But tonight the mood was different, deeper, more reflective, charged with the emotional weight of the day's experiences. "Today felt like a turning point," William said, voicing what Catherine had been thinking. "Watching you with the children, seeing how you've thought about every detail to make this meaningful for them, it's given me a new appreciation for intentional family building." Charles was quiet for a moment, clearly processing his own emotions from the day. "I've been thinking so much lately about legacy," he finally said. "Not just the institutional legacy of the monarchy, but the personal legacy of family relationships and values passed down through generations. Today felt like progress in creating the kind of family bonds I hope will sustain you all through whatever challenges lie ahead." As Christmas Eve drew to a close, Catherine felt profoundly grateful for the day's experiences and deeply moved by the evidence of healing and growth happening within their family. Tomorrow would bring Christmas Day with all its traditions and celebrations, but tonight she was content to savor the success of Charles's vision for bringing his family together in authentic and meaningful ways. Christmas morning at Sandringham dawned with a gentle snowfall that transformed the already magical estate into a winter wonderland that seemed almost too perfect to be real. Catherine woke to the sound of excited whispers and suppressed giggles from the children's rooms, and she smiled as she realized they were clearly awake but trying to follow the rule about not leaving their rooms until 7 o'clock. William stretched beside her, his face relaxed in a way she hadn't seen in months. The stress lines that had become more prominent in recent weeks seemed to have softened, and there was a contentment in his expression that spoke to how deeply meaningful the previous day had been for him. "Listen," he whispered, and Catherine could hear the sound of feet padding carefully in the hallway, small voices engaged in urgent consultation about timing and protocol. "Should we rescue them from their anticipation?" Catherine asked, checking the clock and noting it was still 20 minutes before the agreed-upon time. "I think Grandpapa might already be awake," William replied with a grin. "I heard movement from his direction about an hour ago. He's probably as excited as they are." Indeed, when they made their way to the main floor at precisely 7 o'clock, they found Charles already dressed and waiting in the drawing room, a fire crackling cheerfully in the grate and coffee prepared for the adults. He was wearing a festive red jumper that looked distinctly unkingly and absolutely perfect for a grandfather on Christmas morning. The children appeared moments later, led by George, who was clearly taking his role as eldest seriously, followed by Charlotte, who was practically vibrating with excitement, and Louis, who launched himself directly at his grandfather with characteristic enthusiasm. "Happy Christmas, Grandpapa," the chorus of voices filled the room, and Catherine felt her heart swell as she watched Charles gather his grandchildren around him, his face radiating pure joy. "Happy Christmas, my darling children," Charles replied, his voice thick with emotion. "Are you ready to see what Christmas magic has appeared overnight?" The morning unfolded with a perfect balance of tradition and spontaneous joy. Gifts were opened with ceremony but also with genuine excitement and appreciation. Catherine was touched to see that Charles had clearly put enormous thought into each present, choosing items that reflected deep understanding of each child's personality and interests. But it was the gifts the children gave to their grandfather that provided the most emotionally powerful moments of the morning. In addition to their handmade book, each child had created something special just for him. Charlotte presented a watercolor painting of Sandringham House with all of them standing in front, painted in her careful, detailed style. George offered a handwritten story about a wise king who was also the best grandfather in the world. Louis, with some help from his siblings, had made a clay handprint ornament with "For Grandpapa's Christmas Tree" written around the edge in wobbly letters. Catherine watched Charles receive each gift with tears in his eyes, understanding that these simple, heartfelt creations meant more to him than any expensive or elaborate present could. His response to each child was individual and personal, showing that he truly saw and appreciated their unique gifts and personalities. "You know," Charles said as the gift opening concluded, "I have one more surprise for all of you." But this one requires us to take a little walk." The mystery deepened as Charles led them through the house to a section Catherine had never visited before, down a corridor lined with portraits of previous generations of the royal family. At the end of the hallway, he stopped before a door that bore a small brass plaque reading, "The Children's Christmas Room." "This room," Charles explained, his hand on the door handle, "has been waiting for the right grandchildren to discover it. It's been prepared especially for you." The room beyond the door was enchanting, a child-sized wonderland that managed to feel both magical and comfortable. There were bookshelves filled with classic children's literature, art supplies arranged invitingly on small tables, comfortable reading nooks with soft cushions and good light, and toys that seemed carefully chosen for their quality and lasting appeal rather than their trendiness. But the centerpiece of the room was a large dollhouse replica of Sandringham itself, complete in every detail from the main house to the stables to the gardens. It was clearly handcrafted with extraordinary skill, and Catherine realized that this must have been a project Charles had been working on for months, if not longer. "Is this really for us?" Charlotte asked in wonder, her hands clasped together as she examined the incredible miniature. "This room belongs to you children whenever you're here," Charles confirmed. "And the dollhouse is yours to play with and add to. I thought you might enjoy creating stories and adventures using this little version of our family home." Catherine felt overwhelmed by the thoughtfulness and effort this represented. This wasn't just a playroom, but a carefully designed space meant to help the children feel truly at home at Sandringham, to see it as their place too, not just a formal royal residence they occasionally visited. George was already examining the dollhouse with the careful attention he brought to anything that captured his interest. "Look," he called to his siblings, "you can see inside all the rooms. And there are tiny people who look like us." Indeed, there were small figurines clearly meant to represent each family member, dressed in miniature versions of clothes they actually wore. The attention to detail was extraordinary and deeply personal. The morning continued with exploration of this magical new space, followed by a traditional Christmas brunch that somehow managed to feel both elegant and relaxed. Catherine found herself marveling at how Charles had succeeded in creating an atmosphere that honored royal traditions while still feeling authentically family-centered. The afternoon brought the traditional Christmas walk, a long-standing royal custom that took on new meaning with three energetic children eager to explore every corner of the estate. Charles proved to be an enthusiastic tour guide, pointing out wildlife, sharing historical stories, and creating games that kept the children engaged throughout the extended walk. "Grandpapa," Louis announced as they paused near the lake, "this is the best Christmas ever." "Do you really think so?" Charles asked, kneeling down to Louis's level. "Yes. Because we're all together and you made everything special just for us." Catherine felt tears prick at her eyes as she watched Charles's reaction to this simple, heartfelt declaration. The joy on his face was unmistakable, but there was also something deeper, a sense of fulfillment and validation that spoke to how much this family time meant to him. The traditional Christmas dinner that evening was served in the main dining room, but Charles had arranged for the children to be full participants rather than requiring them to simply endure an adult meal. There were crackers to pull and silly hats to wear, games between courses that kept everyone engaged, and stories shared around the table that created the feeling of a true family celebration. "I'd like to propose a toast," Charles said as dessert was being served, raising his glass and looking around the table at his family. "To the most wonderful Christmas gift I could have received, the joy of having my family together, the privilege of watching my grandchildren grow and flourish, and the blessing of seeing the kind of parents William and Catherine have become." "To family," William replied, raising his own glass, and Catherine felt the significance of that simple phrase, the way it encompassed everything they had shared over these past few days. As evening approached and the children began to show signs of the happy exhaustion that comes after a perfect day, Catherine found herself reflecting on the transformation she had witnessed in Charles over the course of this Christmas celebration. The formal, sometimes distant figure she had known in the early years of her relationship with William had revealed himself to be a deeply caring, thoughtful grandfather who had clearly given enormous consideration to making this gathering meaningful for everyone involved. Later, after the children had been settled for the night with their heads full of magical memories and their arms full of new treasures, Catherine sat with William and Charles in the drawing room one final time. The fire was burning low, casting warm shadows across the comfortable furniture, and the atmosphere was one of deep contentment and satisfaction. "I need to tell you both something," Charles said, his voice carrying the weight of considered thought. These few days have given me something I didn't realize I needed, the chance to be simply a grandfather, to focus on family relationships without the constant pressure of official duties and public obligations. Catherine leaned forward slightly, sensing the importance of what he was trying to express. When I invited you for this Christmas, Charles continued, I had hopes, but I wasn't certain we could achieve what we've accomplished together. The easy conversation, the genuine laughter, the sense of being a family first and royal figures second, it's exceeded my most optimistic expectations. William set down his brandy glass and looked directly at his father. Papa, these days have been healing for me too. Seeing you with the children, understanding the thought and love you put into every detail of their experience here, it's given me a new perspective on so many things. There's something I want you both to understand, Charles said, his voice becoming more formal but no less emotional. Whatever challenges lie ahead for our family, whatever pressures public life brings, I want you to know that moments like these, authentic family connection, will always be our anchor. This is what really matters. Catherine felt the profound truth of his words, and also the implicit message about the future they all knew was coming. Charles would not be king forever, and, when the time came for William to assume the crown, the family dynamics would shift again. But the foundation they had built during this Christmas, the depth of understanding and love they had cultivated, would sustain them through whatever transitions lay ahead. We want the children to remember this Christmas, Catherine said softly. Not just as a lovely holiday, but as the time when they truly understood that Sandringham is their family home too, and that their grandfather's love for them is unconditional and enduring. That's exactly what I hoped for, Charles replied. And I think we've succeeded beyond what any of us could have imagined. As the evening drew to a close and they prepared to retire, Catherine felt a profound sense of gratitude for the experience they had shared. This Christmas had been transformative for all of them, strengthening family bonds, creating precious memories, and establishing new traditions that would endure for generations to come. Standing at the window of their bedroom that final night, looking out over the snow-covered estate that had become so much more meaningful over the course of their stay, Catherine felt deeply moved by the journey they had taken together. Charles's invitation had been about much more than a holiday celebration. It had been about healing, about connection, about creating the kind of family legacy that would sustain them all through the unique challenges of their extraordinary lives. Tomorrow they would return to their regular routines, but they would carry with them the gifts of this special Christmas, deeper understanding, stronger bonds, and the certain knowledge that family love could flourish even within the complex realities of royal life. Most importantly, they had given Charles exactly what he had hoped for, the joy of being a beloved grandfather whose love and wisdom would be treasured by his grandchildren for all their lives to come. As Catherine drifted off to sleep, she smiled thinking about the children's excitement over their new playroom, Charles's tears over their handmade gifts, and William's obvious happiness at seeing his father and children connect so beautifully. This had indeed been a Christmas that would be remembered and cherished for generations, not for its grandeur, but for its genuine love and authentic family joy.